Today, I want to talk about what makes a podcast good. And there's a few different reasons what makes one podcast good than another podcast. And there's a few specific ways that I want to lay it out. And just to dive right into it, the first one being audio quality. How is the quality of not only yourself, maybe you have a guest on the show, maybe you have a co host. You want to make sure that the quality of the audio is going to be good. And this is also to say, sometimes you may record an interview and your audio quality is loud. Maybe the guest's audio quality is quiet and it's a little bit harder to hear them. So if you're someone listening to the audio or your podcast, you don't have to turn the volume up when the guest is speaking, turn the volume down. When you're producing your episode, whether it's you, whether you're outsourcing it, just make sure that the audio quality is stabilized so it's an even sound across the entire interview. And with that said, you want a good quality professional microphone. I use the Blue Yeti mic. I've used Audio Technica. I've used Blue Snowball. You could really just go on Amazon and search podcast microphone. A good quality mic is going to run you anywhere from $50 to $100. So it really doesn't have to be that expensive. But again, you just want to make sure you have a nice quality podcast microphone. And from there, you also want to make sure that if you're having a guest on your show, that they also have a good quality podcast microphone. You don't want to be having someone on your show that, let's say they're listening, they have the AirPods in, they're doing it from their phone, they're doing it outside. Just, you want to make sure everyone involved has good audio quality. It's just going to make the listener experience that much better. Outside of that, you want to, and it doesn't have to be down to an exact science, but who's your defined target audience and what niche are you going to be speaking to? Maybe you're speaking to passive investors. Maybe you're speaking to multifamily investors. Maybe you just want to do real estate general and that you just happen to talk to multifamily investors, self-storage, mobile home park, your note investors, fix and flip guys. You're happy to really just talk to anyone, but you want to sort of have your defined niche and your target audience when you're going out there and starting your podcast. And this will just give you the help you need to really understand, who am I looking to target? I mean, there's 2 million podcasts out there. What's going to make your podcast stand out from the X, Y, and Z podcast down the road? And a lot of that just becomes from having your defined target audience and niche. And there's been real estate shows that are just general. There's been entrepreneur shows that have just been general. So it's really up to you and what you're looking to do when it comes to your defined target audience and your niche. The next piece is consistency. There's some stat out there where about 90% of podcasts fail or stop producing after the 10th episode. Podcasting is a long-term game, and especially when you're a podcast host, unless you already have a following built up, it could be 6 months, 12 months before you start to see your return on your investment, before you start to see your download count go up, and just different things like that. So you really want to be consistent. As an example, for my podcast, I have an interview go out every Monday. I have a helpful piece of content go out every Thursday. And that's how I structured my podcast. And to make sure I have that consistency built up, I have a backlog of episodes. So what that backlog of episodes means to me is that I know when I'm going out there and producing my podcast, as an example, I want to release 5 episodes the day of, and then do the one interview per week when we're interviewing someone, and then the helpful content episode as well. But I wanted to have those structures in place so that way I knew in case something happened to me, something came up in my life, I would have the content already there and ready to go. And for me, that meant having at least 10 weeks of backfill. So about 2.5 months or so of pre-recorded episodes already scheduled, already edited, already ready to go out. Again, just in case something happens, so I can have that consistency. So that's another aspect of it. The next aspect of what makes a podcast good is, are you going to be having interviews? Are you going to be having guests on your show? Or are you going to be doing solo episodes? For my podcast, I do a mixture of both interviews and solo episodes. I find the interviews I like to be 20 or 30 minutes long. Solo episodes can be anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes or so, where I'm just trying to provide helpful content for our audience. So that's what I would say what makes a podcast good when it comes to deciding which one you want to go into, and then just stick with it. Or maybe you want to mix it up and have a solo episode every now and then. Again, it just goes back to being and having that consistency for your podcast. So I would take a look at that, figure out what you're going to want to do, because if you have solo episodes, there's a lot of tools you can use. I use one, I believe it's either called Answer the Public or Ask the Public. And you can type in podcasting, podcast guesting, and it's going to give you all these different content ideas that you can use for your podcast if you're going to be doing a solo podcast. Now, if you're going to be having guests, are you going to be booking the guests? Is someone from your team going to be booking the guests? How are you going to find those guests? So you would want to know that beforehand. You don't want to just say, oh, I want to interview people without really having that game plan in place to find those guests. I would say the next aspect of it would be personalization. And what I mean by personalization is you don't necessarily have to copy other people's podcasts. You know, Joe Rogan has a 3-hour podcast. You don't really need to have a 3-hour podcast. Maybe you want to have a 10-minute podcast. Maybe you want 15, 30, however long it may be. You want to personalize it to what you're looking to do and what fits best with you. I mean, there's real estate investors that do 5 interviews a week, 7 interviews a week. That's way more than I'm looking to do. I just don't want to do that. I just want to do my 2 episodes a week, and that's really all I want to do at this point in time. And for me and for my show, I realized I want to provide helpful content, so I'm going to do that once a week. And then the other days of the week, how I made my show unique was I wanted to bring on these real estate investors and come to them from an LP lens and interview them. Okay, someone is interested in investing with you. What does it look like on a prospective call? Okay, now they've had that prospective call. How do you market to them for the next 3 to 6 months if they're not ready to invest in the deal? Okay, now they've invested with you. They've put in $50K into your deal. Now what does that look like? How often do you communicate with them? What does that reporting look like? And that's how I came to my podcast. And I wanted to just be a little bit different than the other real estate podcasts that are out there. And that's how I personalized it. And then you're spending a lot of time during your week doing these podcast interviews. Why not take that time and create content from your interviews? I mean, from a single 15, 20, 30, even upwards to an hour podcast interview, there's so many different clips of content that you can create. I mean, ideally from at least one interview that either I'm conducting as a host, whether I'm conducting like we are today, if you're listening to the podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, and I'm just taking it and I'm going to create about 5 to 7 social media clips from it and just schedule those out over the course of a week. And I have social media content there. So it's just super beneficial. I mean, you're doing all this work up front. Why not create the social media content out of it? And again, you could either have yourself do it, someone on your team. You could outsource it to Upwork, Fiverr. I personally have used both Upwork and Fiverr for the social media content creation. They've been hit or miss. Some have been good, some have been not good. So you just got to feel your way out. If someone creates 5 social media posts, like, I don't really like those, then you go test someone else, or maybe you give them feedback, whatever it may be. You want to make it good at the end of the day. But that's a general overview of what makes a podcast good. It really doesn't have to be that challenging. You don't have to have a large following to begin and to start your podcast. When I started my podcast, and not the one that, if you're listening to it today, I'd started one, or watching this video, I'd started one back in 2015. I was 18 years old. I was in college, and I just thought it'd be cool to start a podcast, and I didn't have any following whatsoever. And I was able to start that podcast and grow that podcast to a decent size. Unfortunately, looking back, I wish I kept on with it, but it really doesn't have to be that difficult. These are really just an overview of what makes a podcast good. And I hope that was very helpful for everyone today listening or watching this video. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day till we speak to you next time.